Tomorrow, when your children look out their windows, what will they see? A world filled with beauty? A feast for the senses? Treated with respect? Will they do business with companies focused on the long term, who place the importance of the earth and her resources above all else? That's the road we're on. Care to join us? In the beginning, it was a simple idea: to lease and operate a sawmill. It started small, with a father and son partnership, a diesel-powered mill, and a knack for working with wood. The idea grew and grew into over 2 million acres of forest land in the United States. Deep inside this carefully managed land, another idea was born. We started building beautiful ways to embrace what's outside from the comfort inside. What's the most responsible way to do this? With careful use of the precious resources you need to make it happen, and a family of committed, talented people. You make use of everything. The bark and sawdust that's left over, you use it to create energy for the communities you live in. Then you replant, to bring back more trees, to keep the forest thriving. After all this, you learn something. When you focus on doing good work, good things happen. When you're more interested in getting it right than in getting attention, recognition comes. When you treat each other with respect, doing something you love, you build something that endures. When you set your sights on the long term, you make decisions that protect the most valuable things on earth. Our mission? To do it right, to never compromise, to make the best windows and doors you can buy in the most sustainable way possible, from seed to delivered product. So when you look through the glass of one of our windows or doors, you'll like what you see today and look forward to what you'll see tomorrow. Sierra Pacific, windows that never compromise.
Welcome. My name is Sarah Shelton, and I am the market editor at Luxe Interiors and Design. We're calling this segment today, Windows on Tomorrow, and we're going to talk about just that, the wonderful world of windows. And we have quite the dynamic duo with us today to speak on the topic. We have designer, author, and all-around household name on all things design, Emily Henderson, and longtime window guru and Sierra Pacific Windows sales pro, Brent Gerard. Hi, Emily and Brent, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you?
So Emily and Brent, you two are in cahoots on a very special project right now. And Emily, I'm hoping you can tell us what you guys are working on and how you know Brent.
Yes, okay, so my family, we made one of those semi-permanent decisions in 2020 to buy a farm in Oregon, which is where I'm from originally. So it's like a 120-year-old farmhouse property that had so much potential, but definitely needed a lot of help. And so I find that windows and doors are probably the most they're the most important architectural feature in the house, in my opinion. So, so one of the first things that we wanted to do is really assess how we can make this house our dream house in rainy Oregon. And moving from California, by the way, is a little bit tricky weather-wise. So we just knew that, especially because of that the windows and doors were going to be really important. So I reached out to Sierra Pacific, and Brent has been the most incredible customer service sales expert ever, because it was a big job, huh, Brent?
Yes, that was a big one.
Very closely together. And so that's how we know each other. And the project is going very well. We just got, by the way, just to give you an update, we just got the windows last week. They're being installed and they are so gorgeous that every time I go over there, I just get this insane burst of serotonin, because I know that this is going to make the house. And it finally is starting to come together. I'm very excited.
Well, we cannot wait to see more progress shots and, of course, the finished product. But Brent, you're with Sierra Pacific, and can you give us a brief overview of who they are, what they do, and where they're based?
Yes, Sierra Pacific Industries is our parent company and is based in, our headquarters is based in Anderson, California. And I work for the Windows division, which our headquarters is and plant is in Red Bluff, California.
Amazing. Emily, we are all familiar with your TV show, your books, your blog, and of course, your Instagram. And we know you have guided many folks when it comes to design. And I liked what you said earlier, that you think that windows and doors are such an important architectural element. And I think that might not be something that everyday design enthusiasts may think about. So can you give us your thoughts on windows and what to keep in mind when homeowners or builders or renovators are making some of these very big window and door decisions?
I sure can. So it was probably like 4 years ago, I was doing a house in LA, our home there, and I brought in this architect, and I asked him on site, I was like, what is, like, where do you splurge? When you're doing a house. I loved his work, and that's what he said, windows and doors, which did surprise me. I just wouldn't have thought that. I don't know why. And then once I started thinking about it and looking around, I was like, oh yeah, like a room with pretty windows and doors is instantly a better room. Not only because of natural light, obviously, but also just the decorative elements or the lack of decorative elements that it can have. So now I'm obsessed with it, and I'm not trying to plug my book, but I just finished a book that comes out in a few months, and there's a huge windows and doors chapter because I think that, well, it's very intimidating. It's a long-term decision. It should be, and it is. It's not a cheap one, right? So you really want to make sure that you are armed with all the information so people can really make empowered choices and not make a mistake, because it's an expensive mistake to make. So yeah, I've done so much research, and now I'm like obsessed with it. And one of the reasons I want to work with Sierra Pacific, there's a lot of reasons, but I like the locality to Oregon, the fact that there is some of their harvesting is done in Oregon and Northern California. That like just made me feel good, because I like to know where everything these days comes from and how it's being made. I think it's important, especially at a certain level, to make sure that you're making really intentional choices. And so that made me feel really good. I was like, oh, like, and I love all the stewardship that they do, and the fact that they have so many scientists on board. I think there's a fancier name for it, but that really care for the land and make sure that it's harvested sustainably. So I loved that. And then also they're just very pretty. And so when I was designing this house, we had these original windows on the second floor that are in pretty good shape, but they're this diamond pattern. They're called Dutch double hungs. And so we needed to figure out how to redo the first floor to work with those original windows. And the customization possibilities with Sierra was incredible. Like we could really bring that diamond pattern downstairs in a way that still worked with some of our more standard grid patterns that we also wanted to put in, because we didn't want the entire house to have this diamond pattern. So working with Brent, like we figured out how to do it, and they just arrived, and they're so pretty. And then another thing I just want to harp on for the rest of my life is, like, if you're going to do the windows, you need to really maximize your natural light and your views. And you need to walk through the space and be like, okay, if there was a window here, what am I going to be looking at? Is that where I want a window even to be? And then also, like, if you're going to put a window, like, scale up to make sure you're getting as much natural light as possible, especially in places like Oregon, where it's really gray, guys. So having all that indirect natural light bouncing around, it creates such a happier home instantly, and it makes it so much easier to decorate. Like you don't need to put a bunch of stuff in a room that has really pretty natural light and really pretty finishes. So it just makes your life easier just to have those features in that room and to have that natural light. So I'm really into windows.
Yeah, your passion is very clear. We love it. But it's good to know that, scaling up and really thinking about the view and the natural light just really makes such a difference. And I'm sure coming from sunny California to Oregon, I mean, there's probably so many different factors to take into account when you were making these decisions.
One thing I love about Sierra's windows is all the finish options. So on the outside, we have aluminum cladding, which is really important for weather resistance and for longevity. Like they're not gonna rot. They're not gonna, they're gonna take on the hail and the rain really well. But then on the inside, we got this beautiful white oak. So it's like, and we were able to get the what do they call it? The mullions really thin, and so it just looks so high quality, so high end, and the white oak is so beautiful in person, you guys. There's other options with the wood too, but we really fell in love with the white oak. So it's like, you want to think about scale, you want to think about view, you want to think about like, how you're interacting with the natural world outside, but then also like how you're going to finish it off, like both on the exterior and the interior, to make sure that it's going to last as long as possible, and it is going to be as beautiful on the inside as possible.
These are some really great takeaways, and I cannot wait to see this white oak. It sounds quite chic. Brent, needless to say, you know the window world quite well. You've been with Sierra Pacific for quite some time. Can you walk us through some timely trends, and also on the flip side, maybe some tried and true takeaways when it comes to windows and doors in the home? I know Emily gave us some great examples, and I would love for you to add to that.
A lot of it boils down to your architects and your designers that come up with the house plans. And you'll see over the time period that depending on what style of house you're building will determine what style of window you're going to use in that area. And so over those times, a lot of that has stayed steady, but then I would say in the last probably 10 years, you've seen a lot of things really take off as far as not necessarily fully contemporary, but becoming modern. Like Emily's is a modern farmhouse, and it's not just the old farmhouse. And the more modern style house of where we're doing horizontal grids, and the color black on the outside and black on the inside is probably the most popular thing right now. And we have the more contemporary crank handles for your windows, your doors. So all the way from contemporary all the way to colonial, we can fit everything.
It does seem right now that, Brent, I think you might agree with me that architecturally there's less rules than I feel like there used to be with, I mean, I think it's very important to know the rules, by the way. And then like, I've just seen a lot of like creative ways of going against them that I think that has been really interesting to watch visually out in the field. Like, I think that it's like, you want to think about function first, right? You want to think about like, how are you going to actually use the window? Are you going to, is it casement versus double hung? And we talked about this, Brent, because a lot of the windows in our house are double hung upstairs, and casement is probably the most popular way, right, to use a window right now. So it's then just figuring out how to mix those, or if you can, and we did and can. And so it's like, you want to think about like, function, how you're going to actually use them. Do you want to go like this, or do you want to do this? And then go to style after that. Because I really liked how we mixed in some double hungs. I feel like it feels really traditional in the way that, but still modern, because the actual scale of the finish of the wood that we chose feels so like sleek and modern. So I just think that it was really fun working with Brent on it, because we could really go window by window and say, is this a casement double hung, or does it even need to operate anyway? And we have some that, Brent, you're going to freak out when you see them. We have some that are like 10 feet wide and 10 feet high, like in front of our bathtub. It's like I don't need to put anything else in the room when you have that. It's just such a feature. It's going to be so beautiful. So I don't want to just brag about my windows so much, but I'm so excited about them because we just got them.
I mean, you can totally brag about a 10-foot window in front of a bathtub. That sounds amazing, and sounds like it's magazine cover worthy. That's incredible. So Emily, you had mentioned this earlier. You had teased sustainability, and I think it's a great place for us to end. I know that, making sustainable decisions is near and dear to your heart when it comes to this dream project, building your home in Oregon. Can you tell us what kind of decisions you're making when it comes to that? And also, Brent, I would love for you to follow up, to tell us what kind of things that Sierra Pacific is doing in the realm of sustainability. So Emily, I will let you kick it off.
Yeah, so this project, I think more than any others, I've really just made this massive existential shift to make sure that I can be as local and be as sustainable with every single choice if possible. And I have a budget to do that, by the way. Like making these choices can be more expensive. So I think it's a real important thing for people, if you are, privileged enough to renovate your home, to make sustainable decisions, because the home renovation world is a culprit in a lot of ways to a lot of problems. So one of the biggest things, so I wanted to be local, which is why I love Sierra Pacific, because we're in the Pacific Northwest together. And then I wanted it to be purchasing once and forever. Like, these windows will last for the rest of my life. And that is the most important thing you can do for waste management, right? It's just buying once and making it last forever. And then also heat and coolant. I mean, that is a huge culprit with energy, obviously. So just making sure that your house is really sealed up. So you need really good windows to do that. You need double panes. You need to make sure that they are going to seal really well. Otherwise, you're not only spending a lot more, obviously, but you're really using up energy that you don't need to be. So it's just very important to me in this house. And it's also just knowing that I have a lot of I have a large audience that's reading and following, trying to influence their decisions too, because like I said, if you're privileged enough to renovate, I think that we all should be making really sustainable choices.
Amazing. And Brent, I know that Sierra Pacific is doing a lot in this world. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. We're actually truly a vertical integrated company. We own the land, we plant the seeds, we manage the land, we process the wood, we convert to lumber, and then everything that's left over gets reused. We have a cogen plant that burns and makes energy and gives back to the state. And then we assemble the parts, and then we have our own trucking division too, to where we truck and do that. And just recently in our Red Bluff facility for windows and millworks, we bought 30 acres and put up 30,000 solar panels in the back. And that almost covers enough power to operate both places. So it'll pay back over the time period, and then we're not wasting energy. We're building energy.
It's amazing all of the responsible decisions that this company is making, from, seedling to siding. I mean, it's incredible that you guys growing the wood that's making these windows, and then of course giving back energy to the local area. It's truly an amazing feat in this day and age. But I feel like we covered a lot here, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insight, and for teasing this amazing project that you guys are working on together. Like I said, we can't wait to see the finished product. Emily, best of luck with the rest of your build.
Thank you.
We can tell you're in good hands with Brent. And thank you to our DTV viewers who tuned in today. We'll be back soon with even more amazing content. Thanks, guys, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone, and welcome to Metropolis's webinar on designing for deconstruction. Today's event is being presented in partnership with Econil by Aquafil. Now, waste in the construction process is a huge problem in the A&D industry, and that is exacerbated by the fact that, new construction and renovation are the lifeblood of our industry. That's the activity that keeps us going. But in 2018, the last year that we have full data on municipal solid waste for, the EPA estimated that about 600 million tons of construction demolition debris were generated in the US. So, it is a sizable problem and one that we have to tackle as we're, hurtling towards the climate crisis, as we're trying to be more efficient in our use of materials, resources, and energy. And so we have to think about what we can do with the built environment that we have today. How do we preserve the materials and the energy that has gone into them already? How do we reduce the amount of energy and materials required to build new buildings, to renovate spaces? And then how can we deal with the inevitable demolition or deconstruction that we can, put off, but not, eternally postpone? How do we put in systems so that building materials, interior products can be reused or turned into new products and projects? In short, how do we start to think about the built environment in circular terms? To talk to us about that today, we have a fantastic group of panelists. We have with us Gail Nappel, who's the firm-wide design resilience co-leader and a senior associate at Gensler. Gail, thank you so much for joining us. We also have Susie Westrup, who is the Director of Client Solutions for True Zero Waste at USGBC. Susie, thank you so much for joining us. And we have Franco Rossi, who is president of Aquafil USA. Franco, thank you so much for joining us today. So Gail, I'm going to ask you our first question of the day. Can you tell us how you recently released a report at Gensler about climate action. And as part of that, one of the important things you touched upon was design for deconstruction, was adaptive reuse. So can you tell us a few key strategies that I think designers or architects have to keep in mind in order for us to design for deconstruction rather than demolition?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for covering this important topic. We really appreciate it. As you have said, Gensler has a lot of ideas on this based on our research and experience. So first of all, to design for change from the beginning, to know that things are going to change and to not lock in. And what that means is programming for flexibility over time. It starts with, how much do we actually need to build in the first place? Spaces that serve multiple uses across the span of a day, a week, a year, require fewer materials to begin with. Hyper-specialized spaces are fun, and sometimes we need them, but they can outlive their usefulness very quickly, and bespoke components can be difficult to disassemble and reuse. So part of that is also designing modularly. A number of our global clients have they've settled on modular space standards. At any given site, a phone room is exactly half the size of a small meeting room. A small meeting room is exactly the size of an office. An office is exactly the size of half of a large meeting room, so that we can lay out infrastructure, lighting, power, ductwork, et cetera, in such a way that these rooms can be relatively easily subdivided or combined to reduce the amount of material that we need in the first place. And then to use high impact materials sparingly. So these include materials that have a high embodied carbon footprint and are more difficult to deconstruct, like gypsum board, metal studs, insulation, and infrastructure that are highly bespoke. And then last but not least, partnership. Designing for deconstruction needs all of us, and it needs all of us to leverage our particular skill sets. Owners that are committed to deconstruction. Sometimes designing for deconstruction takes more time for design and procurement up front, but definitely reduces waste and embodied carbon and reconfiguration time and cost over multiple occupancy turns. Designers committed to using design for deconstruction strategies and learning about them if they're unfamiliar. We all are always learning, right? Builders committed to procuring materials that are easily deconstructed and to building for disassembly. The classic thing of it makes more sense to put things together with screws than nails if you want to be able to disassemble them, right? And then manufacturers committing to designing and producing modular products that are easily interchanged or disassembled. And last but not least, the authorities that have jurisdiction, because change must include policy in order to move rapidly.
Absolutely. I think so a few years ago, the Danish firm 3XN had done a bit of an experiment on design with deconstruction, and they came up with the mantra, screws, not glues. I think, so Gail, there's lots of important things in what you just said. First of all is to, think in modular terms. Second is to choose materials appropriately. And in that, I think as a general rule of thumb, any material that is a composite of more than one material or part, like drywall or gypsum board, some flooring materials, those materials you do have to make a plan or have to research better how they can be taken apart. But that's also true of, upholstered office chairs, for instance. So, you do want to think through all the components, as you said. And the third thing is, of course, solutions are not easily found. So partnerships are really important. I think those are three great pillars you've started us off on, Gail. To everyone who's listening, we're here talking about design for deconstruction. Your questions, thoughts, responses are welcome at any point during today's discussion. So if you hear the panelists say something and it triggers a thought in your head, don't let it escape, put it in the Q&A tab, okay? And so that we can discuss it, because we want to have a discussion with you. Susie, I'd love to come to you next. So you work with clients on the TRUE certification, which looks at zero waste performance for buildings and facilities. How do you, and I know you look at a lot of different waste streams, but I'd love to hear you focus on one and talk about how you work with clients on reducing construction and demolition waste. So, while we're taking care of the longer term things that Gail is talking about, while we implement those design strategies, in projects that are being deconstructed or demoed now, what are the strategies you're working with clients on?
Thanks, Avi. Well, first, I just have a disclaimer. I spent the first decade of my career as a general contractor. So even though I work for TRUE, I might get a little excited and put that hat back on at some point today. But as for TRUE, we did enter the market initially as this facility operations certification. We require a year of data at 90% or greater diversion, as well as 31 out of our 81 credits at least to achieve certification. Now, when it comes to it, this data, even from the very beginning, has included what we call all points of generation. So not just in a manufacturing site, that manufacturing footprint, but the break room, the offices, because we want people to be thinking about this holistically. So if, for example, a project pursuing TRUE completes a renovation within their office, then they would be required to analyze that waste stream and to add that construction or demolition materials into their overall diversion data to achieve TRUE certification. So we certainly make sure that it's included in the whole scope when we're certifying an existing facility. But I will say that over the past few years, TRUE's been growing really rapidly and adapting to not just the needs of the market to move faster towards zero waste and circularity, but the needs of our customers who are saying, well, I'm doing this facility that's existing, but I'm building a new one. How can I start from the beginning, much like Gail's saying, and meet this now and then during construction? So I'm very excited that back in 2019, we did have a pilot project that Lend-Lease ran that was all about just analyzing the construction scope for TRUE certification. But our first project, Genesis Marina, which is in California, did just earn pre-certification this fall as they're striving for TRUE certification at the end of their construction project. The irony of this site is that it's actually being built upon an old landfill. But it is fun to see how we're taking, the needs of meeting the aggressive, growth of sustainability and how fast we need to be expediting to meet circularity goals, and now have an offering within our own rating system for just that scope of a building when folks really want to get started from the beginning.
That's really interesting. That people are coming to the certification at all those different points. And I think we do have to, that's what makes what we're talking about today so complicated, is because there's, if we could all turn back time and, build our projects perfectly for deconstruction, I was going to say we could, but then in some cases, we don't even have the tools to do that. But we would do as well as, we could. But, of course, part of the trouble is we're dealing with legacy buildings or legacy facilities that have not been designed for that as well. So I really appreciate that, Susie, like just the range of strategies that you need to look at different stages. One of the things at Metropolis that we found is, when we think about deconstruction or demolition, and I really thank you, Susie and Gail, for talking about this, we sometimes think about entire buildings coming down, but we don't often think about the fact that every time occupants change or every time facilities are updated, like, healthcare spaces, typically facilities managers want their spaces updated every 10 years. Hotels might change their standard package or might change, their standard program, or, might do different things, which means they're renovating every 5 to 7 years just to stay relevant and not look dated, and so there's that cycle. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, home renovation actually was an all-time high. So, almost every kind of architectural or interior space, the insides of them are seeing this churn, as you called it, Gail, this turnover of materials. And that adds up, right? We found if you just look at carbon footprint, the embodied carbon footprint of that churn might be equal to the embodied carbon footprint involved in making the building in the first place, right? And so that's a very significant amount of significant waste stream. And so, as we're thinking about architectural scale, we have to think that the interior scale, actually, that turn is happening at a much faster rate. And I think that's where Franco, Aquafil comes in as well. So your Econil product is used to make carpets. Carpets tend to be one of the, carbon hotspots in almost any kind of space, just because, they cover so much area. But Econil, which is the carpet fiber that you make, or the plastic that you make that's used to make carpet fiber, is made of 100% regenerated nylon. And one of the sources for that nylon is older carpets, right? Along with ocean plastic and all kinds of other things. So Franco, I wonder if you can just talk to us about how Aquafil is seeing waste streams or demolition material or older products as, in fact, an input for your manufacturing process, and how you've sort of invested or are leveraging waste as a manufacturer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for the question. I'm glad to be here. So Aquafil has, per se, invented Econil 10, 11 years ago. As you define, is 100% recycled nylon material. And we use a specific kind of nylon, which is called nylon 6, and that's for a reason. Nylon 6 is made out of a single monomer, so it's a polymer, so a chain of single molecules. But as different from most all other plastic, the monomer is a single one. It's called caprolactam. It's a weird name, but caprolactam is the monomer that once you zip the chain, allow you to make nylon, and particularly nylon 6. So the simplicity of nylon 6 has made it the material of choice for 99% of our production. And we have developed a lot of technology based on nylon 6 because we believe is one of the most sustainable material you can think of, at least in the plastic environment. So the technology that we have implemented with Econil is called depolymerization, which enable us to unzip the chain and go back from nylon to caprolactam, pretty much to reverse the process that we have made before, or that people makes to move from this chemical called caprolactam into nylon. And chemical, in this case, is not really a bad word. The chemical reaction, which is required both to polymerize and both to depolymerize nylon, it's simply based on water, temperature, and pressure. So there is no other chemicals which are added, or there are no byproduct. The so-called yield or efficiency is very close to 100%. So by itself, it's a very good technology. And when we decided to invest in ECONYL, we thought that really resolving or applying this technology to depolymerize all nylon was the most difficult part. Well, it has proven to be not really easy, but not particularly complicated. It is definitely capital intensive, but not hard to achieve from a technical standpoint. The real challenge started when we had to find material to feed the ECONYL plant and to supply this plant with enough nylon-based materials that are suitable to be depolymerized. And so we started to go around and try to find material which are made of nylon, and then started the first challenge to find them where they are. And then the collection became definitely another big challenge, because we're talking about reverse logistics. And as the world has become very able and actually master of distribution and logistics, Amazon being an example, there is really very little reverse logistics system in place other than trash. Trash is the reverse logistics system of choice and going to the landfill. So that has been one of the issues that we had to face. And the other big issue that we had to face, nylon is not really used as a single material to make, no product is made out of nylon only. So we had to find out what kind of material had a fairly high content of nylon, but still, even when we found them, the problem was how to deconstruct those products and separate the nylon portion from everything else. So we started with the fishnets, and the fishnets, so we team up with some companies in Northern Europe, and they manage the nets for the fishermen. But not only manage them, they separate, they clean them, they package them in a way that can be then transported. But then, when you got fishnet, most of those fishnets are coated with a copper-based material in order to prevent seaweeds. So that's not a problem we have to face, how to eliminate the copper coating material, because you cannot really depolymerize copper. I mean, copper is something else. And then, I come to the matter of the day, which is construction material, which in our case is mostly applicable to carpet. So carpet is definitely a fairly complicated topic. It's very voluminous, it's very heavy. 4 billion pounds of carpet are discarded every year in the United States. And they contain nylon. So we were interested in it. And of course, that would also fit perfectly the circularity model that we try to promote, as our main product is nylon fibers. So fibers to make carpet. And so in order to that, we have invested in 2 plants in California and Arizona to deconstruct carpet. Carpet is mostly made of, mostly, not really mostly. Carpet definitely has a portion of nylon. The face fiber is nylon for a good portion of the nylon, which is still made. But then you have everything else. 50% of the weight in carpet is filler, which is limestone, sand, or dirt, whichever way you want to call it, which is added simply to make the product look more robust and heavy, so give some apparent value to the product. But at the end, it's a very inexpensive material, and it becomes a byproduct, which is hard to dispose or hard to find a use for, because it's very, very cheap. And then it comes the separation from the other components of carpet. There are glues, there are other plastic, polypropylene. So anyway, long story short, we have now 2 working facilities on the west side of the United States, and we deconstruct carpet. So we separate the three main ingredients, the nylon on one side, the polypropylene on the other side, and the calcium carbonate of the filler on the third side. But then when you have a plant like this, or plants like this, the other problem is where do I source carpet? Where do I find carpet? The problem that I mentioned before, which is reverse logistics. Carpet does not come home by itself. I mean, you need to have a system to collection and working with carpet installers and carpet dealers and distribution center in order to first collect it and then separate it into the different streams based on the face fiber that the carpet are made of. And so Aquafil has invested in a company who has now 4 locations, 3 in California and 1 in Arizona, to do carpet collection and sorting. That's what technically is called. All this is very expensive, as you can imagine. And so I want to maybe reiterate what Gail said at the beginning with her intervention. Certainly some authority or government intervention is required if we really want to move into circularity, because circularity is going to be very expensive. And as we all in theory agree that we want to be circular, we want to build material in order to be easily disassembled, we want to make sure that there is the waste stream are collected separately so we can then repurpose the ingredients. But all these things are expensive and nobody want to pay or nobody want to pay for it. So at one point, the government, the authorities at any level, country, state, local, county level, they need to intervene and put, I don't know, a ban on certain landfilling. There are a number of measures. I don't think we have the time to go through all of them, but at some point, people need to realize that moving from a linear economy to a circular economy, it costs money. It does not come for free. In one way or the other, somebody has to pay for it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Franco. I think, our intentions, whether it is at, the corporate level or the client level may be great. And Susie definitely knows that lots of organizations want to be carbon neutral and want to be zero waste. And our intentions as architects and interior designers may be working with those organizations and having our own sort of commitments to environmental practices are also good, as Gail was saying, we want to kind of make sure. And yet, of course, today's reality is that despite most carpet manufacturers having some kind of take back program and having had, in some cases, having had that for 10 years or more, we see about 4% of the carpet in the US actually being sent back to, the manufacturer. And there's very complex reasons for that. Until recently, manufacturers weren't able to accept products from other manufacturers because they're not sure of the chemical composition and so on and so forth. There's lots of different factors in that. But if you look at carpet, as you've laid out so eloquently, Franco, if you look at carpet as one example of a building material, it is a great symbol for all the problems we have in designing for deconstruction. In that we need, as you said, policy incentives, we need economic incentives, we need the technology to be able to handle the material, we need to have businesses willing to handle the material, and we need those, what you call reverse logistics, Franco, in order for us to, send back materials to those manufacturers who want to process it back into new products. So, I think there's many things here that we can pick apart. A quick reminder again for our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put it into the Q&A tab. I'm happy to take them at any point in time during today's event. Let's start maybe at the start of the design process. And Gail, maybe you want to talk to this first. In the absence of those broader government mandates, although some local jurisdictions are trying, Washington DC, I think has, like many other states, many other spaces have really high tipping fees. So it's sometimes, they're trying to change that economic incentive in terms of sending to the landfill versus finding other solutions. So people are trying different levers here. However, what are some good ways to talk about adaptive reuse or design for deconstruction with clients? How do we have that conversation?
So one of the things that we've done, and I think you probably are familiar with the Flex Workspace project that we did with the Irvine Company, which was specifically for commercial office space, but to talk to them about the alluring positive impact that's possible by designing for deconstruction from the beginning. And that particular program is for short-term, just-in-time tenant spaces. And so we did a project with them to figure out how could we design initial fit outs with fixed rooms inboard that could easily be converted in the way that we talked about modularly and so on, and then have it be reconfigurable in a way that minimized demolition over time and deconstruction, so that there wasn't so much material coming out of a project. And so this particular project that we did as a case story, it seems really basic, and in many ways those kind of simple design moves are basic. But the possible outcome, and in this particular case, a 43% reduction in waste over 3 turns of the space, and basically a 1/3 embodied carbon impact because you're not really massively reconfiguring the space. And then reconfiguration times of 6 weeks or less, which from a financial perspective and an occupancy perspective is very attractive to commercial office clients. So that's one of the ways that we talk to our clients, is to say, well, what would be the benefits for you, not just of doing good, but literally for your business and your tenants. So that's a very specific example, but hopefully one that gives an idea of some of the ways that we can talk with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all those 3 things, so, the reduction in waste, the reduction in carbon footprint, especially as so many corporations around the world are starting to track their carbon footprints, and then the reduction in construction time for turnovers, right? 3 really, really concrete sort of outcomes out of that project, which are great motivators for clients. Susie, you spoke about clients coming to you, saying, hey, I'm starting this new project now. How do I start to think about zero waste? Can you dig a little deeper into that for us?
Yeah, well, I have the joy of talking about our own space at USGBC headquarters. We really have to model the behavior, which is so fun to kind of try new things and then be able to share that story. But we recently are finishing a renovation to the USGBC headquarters in Washington, DC. And it was really important, of course, to us at our core values to be reusing. So not just thinking about this downstream, but how can we be, the upstream reduction? So everything from ceiling tiles, systems furniture, glass partitions, carpet tiles, our shades, and the motors, we know how expensive those are. We reuse them all in our renovation. And so for a nonprofit that has our membership dollars that, we want to put those to good works, that was a good thing for us, right? We saved a lot of money on this renovation. So regardless of your environmental stake, there's always that motivator. And so I think that that's just something that's really good to share. And we were able to reuse most of the things on site. Anything that we didn't, we also donated. And so I think that that's the other stakeholder that, when I want to talk about with we talk about with our corporate clients, but, getting a material appraiser is sort of this new member of the project team that's pretty critical when you start to have those conversations with owners early on. So I think that having, worked in construction in the past, like maybe that is your construction company and that estimating department that can do some rough order of magnitudes, but there are more sophisticated groups that can come in and really do an inventory of your materials before you even begin to consider design, so that you can see what you can reuse, what can be donated. And again, the cost savings, but also for some folks, that's a nice tax benefit when you're making that donation. But I do think that, again, this is a gap in our infrastructure of, folks that even are marketing themselves as this. There's a great firm in Colorado, Perks Deconstruction, Community Forklift in Maryland. So there, I mean, Google it. Build Reuse is a great website, nonprofit organization that talks a lot about this, that will connect you to some of these people. But there are new folks that are coming into the project team that I think is critical to have that conversation with owners.
And could I just jump in and sorry, tagging on to what Susie said, because this is one of our, you know, our favorite discoveries. And as you say, it's a real gap. It's an opportunity in the marketplace. But one of the things that we're finding is a number of our large clients are finding that using reclaimed product it's right now it's really attractive from a supply chain point of view. And it also tends to have a wonderful story, especially when it's available from a local area. And so we've got a couple of our clients that are in this sort of mini rivalry of, you know, how much of a percentage of all the wood they use on a product can be the reclaimed wood product. So that's another way to talk with clients about the opportunity for something to reuse from the beginning, because then it's like using the carpet that's made from carpet, Franco, right? That you're already starting with circular economy component. And that has an increasingly attractive appeal to clients who are really looking for ways to show that their purpose is being demonstrated in the spaces they're in.
That's right. You bring up a good point here, Gail, and I'd love to hear all three of you talk about this. You know, Franco spoke about policy change, and we'll come to that, but I want to talk about another sort of change, which is a change in mindsets. And Gail, you know, you just spoke about that in terms of how do we look at a material or a product, and because it is not because it's, you know, not discounted because it's refurbished, or not have concerns. I mean, used cars, you know, seem to have great traction, at least in the US, you know, and then I know lots of folks who buy refurbished Apple products. They come from a certificate from Apple and so on. In some places, we've been able to crack this idea of, you know, refurbished materials. How, aside from including that, and in addition to that, what are the ways in which we need to change our mindset when it comes to thinking about product selections and material selections, but also, Susie, in terms of processes or working with contractors? Like, what kind of mindset changes do you think we need? And Franco, also in terms of, you know, when you're thinking about product ingredients and product materials. So at all scales of the building sector, you know, what kind of mindset changes do we need? How do you wish people would think differently?
Well,
can I jump in?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Franco.
Go ahead.
So
I want to say, ooh.
Go ahead,
Franco.
Okay. Well, of course, I can talk about mostly what I'm working on, which is flooring. So, of course, you know, construction includes many more ingredients and many more components than just flooring. But if I may suggest thing for flooring, just as a user or a specifier or a buyer of materials for flooring, I would say, well, you heard me say before, if you go with carpet, if you decide a carpet is the logical choice, I would recommend to look for nylon 6. Of course, I like this to be EcoNail, but I'm not here to promote my product, but definitely nylon 6 is the most recyclable face fiber material that you can find. So if you want to somewhat participate, nylon 6 is what you should look at. The other thing that you probably should be concerned and try to be simple is to make sure that the flooring you buy does not contain any toxic and bioaccumulating chemicals, which are really hard to dispose of once they are put in the environment. For instance, I mean, frequently carpet mills use what they call PFAS, perfluorinated topic treatment. The purpose would be to give some stain resistance to the fiber, but those chemicals are really toxic, and they remain in the stream for decades, if not centuries. So make sure there's no PFAS, no topical treatment put on top of your carpet. The other thing I would like to stay away from is PVC. PVC is still widely used in flooring, not only carpet, but also LVT, which is the new trend and so fashionable, apparently fashionable, but basically it's 90% PVC. And PVC contain plasticizer, which also are known to be toxic materials. So once you look at the backing and the material other than the face fiber, I would recommend to stay away from PVC as much as you possibly can. Just try to make things a little better. Of course, thinking forward, you would like the material to be built in a different way. It's about starting from the beginning or designing with end in mind. And the key word there is simplicity. The simpler, the better. And I don't want to promote here because I don't think is the real setting, a plastic bottle, but just an example that a PET bottle, a bottle of plastic bottle for water, which is made of polyester with no additive, no pigmentation, it's represent the perfect material to be easily recyclable. I'm not saying that we need to buy more water bottle. I'm just saying, and an example is something which is made of a single ingredient or a very few ingredients that are easy to identify without, using glues or bonding agent, which make impossible then to tear back apart, to make them apart. So those are the things that are the basic that we should look at. For instance, face fibers, of course, nylon 6 is the better, but especially don't ever go with mixed face fiber when they use maybe polyester and nylon in the same piece of carpet. Then you're really throwing a monkey wrench into the recycling chain. So simplicity, make it simple and think about it. How can this be easily deconstructed? And if you allow me, Avi, just one thing, you said that only 4% of carpet in the US is recycled. That include California. So it's a great imbalance. Where there is a legislation, those percentages are around 25%. Where there is no legislation, the percentage is 1%. So nobody really recycles carpet unless there is a sort of support from the government, from the authorities, to help that happening due to the current way carpet is made.
Yeah.
Please.
Go ahead. Gail, you were going to come in. And then Susie.
I think Franco covered the main points that I would have.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No, it's perfect. Much more eloquently than I could have. But there was one thing I wanted to just, sometimes we get those reminders, those really stark visual reminders about why it's so important to design as simply as possible with as few ingredients as possible. And just as an example, the tornadoes that went through the Midwest on Friday night, we have family living 10 miles from some of the major devastation. And my son took some video and sent us of, he was driving to go pick up gas for a generator, and passing through the destruction zone. And everything is in splinters of fiberglass insulation and asbestos roofing and toxic sludge, in all these tiny little bits that cannot be recombined. And, when you think about the monumental scale of that waste and also the complexity of our buildings, and these were for the most part fairly simple farmhouses. So that just drove home to me again the need to design in such a way that the ingredients are not toxic, whether they're blown apart by a tornado or deconstructed after the end of the project's useful life, and also that the simpler the things are, the easier they are to deconstruct. So just to add that to Franco's very eloquent description.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys, but I think I'm going to take another step on like the mindset change. And some of this, again, forgive me, like as a contractor, I just have cost always at the top of my brain. And so I think, again, thinking about the savings that can happen with those, as an education, right? Like sharing about embodied carbon, but also just the cost financially for these new materials. But I will say that in addition, and I'm grateful for a lot of you on the call today who I know are designers that are making this beautiful, right? Like, I am so excited about our USGBC headquarters renovation because it's lovely. And to say that, like, you can get this space with only 10% new materials, right? That's something that I think we need to do a better job of, is just educating, showing these case studies and how, yes, like historic preservation. And I think, you know, cities like, is it Milwaukee that has a deconstruction ordinance for historic properties? Great. I'm all about preservation, but like, we need to move beyond just preserving the antique, right? Like, that's the other shift, is that I think a lot of folks see value in those antiques, but how can we see value in something that's just a couple years old, a decade or two old? So I think those are the big pieces for me, are beauty, which is very different than cost. But you know, when you work in sustainability and you talk with people who don't know it, you have to think of all of these different motivators that are going to make them, you know, want to change. And I think that most of us see beauty, and most of us have at least an idea of our pocketbooks. So.
Oh my God, Susie, that is so important. I think all of you have touched on things that, you know, when you think about design for deconstruction, we're just thinking of, you know, regular materials being put back into a recycling plant or something and spitting out new materials. But I think you've pointed out some of those much deeper issues, you know, making sure that our products don't have red list materials or toxic materials is important, not just for the health of the human beings who are in the space now, but for when those products have to be, you know, are going into a landfill or have to be recycled. And then all the people that are going to handle those products then, you know, I think there's full life cycle human impacts of materials that we need to think about when we're thinking about design for deconstruction. And, you know, linked to that, Gail, like, design for deconstruction is also designed for resilience. And I think you reminded us of that, right? Like, when disaster strikes, when something goes wrong, a deconstructible, demountable space is so much easier to deal with the aftermath, and also so much easier to, you know, bring back online, so to speak, right? And so looking at deconstructible spaces also as a resiliency strategy. And then I think, Susie, those two things, cost, of course, all of us care about cost. And I think cost is sometimes put up as the biggest sort of boogeyman in front of sustainability. But I think years of practice have proved that we can. I mean, there's a great new study, we'll put a link in the chat if we can, that showed from RMI that showed that it's possible to bring down embodied carbon in a building by 50% or more at less than 1% extra cost. And even that 1%, there's a way to think about it in terms of return on investment that will pay back for itself over a period of time. So there's many studies to show that cost is not really the big barrier we think it to be. And of course, the most important thing, you know, I think the most human thing we've talked about today is also about beauty. And sometimes we don't talk about that enough when we're having conversations about sustainability, but obviously if we don't create something that's beautiful and that resonates with people, then we've not done our job as architects and designers. We have just a few minutes here. I want to bring a question in that Jen Chen asks. Jen says, how to address warranty, or answering the question, who fixes it when it fails, when it comes to reclaimed or refurbished material? So, you know, very often when clients are making that investment, they want to know, well, if it turns out to be faulty, like, you know, who bears the liability? And, you know, I'm wondering if, Gail, you've thought about that in your work, and, you know, Franco, also in terms of recycled material, you know, how do you guarantee that the recycled material is as good as virgin material? And is that still a concern? But Gail, I'll let you go first on this one.
Thank you. So yes, we do, especially when we look at things like wood, that I think the specification for reclaimed wood that we use has a phrase along the lines of, there will be no larva, toxins, or other, you know, little creepy crawlies, you know, living in the wood. But mostly it's working with people who know the reclaimed materials that they are providing. And so that, you know, as Susie pointed out, that is an opportunity that we have so much opportunity for people to step into that space so that they can assess materials professionally. Just like grading lumber or regrading lumber is done by professional structural engineers to see if it's fit for further structural use or needs to be used for decorative use. But it does also require that designers have some knowledge about, well, what should you use for a certain purpose and what doesn't make sense. Railroad ties, maybe in an interior environment because they probably are full of creosote and so on, maybe not. Maybe you go to a manufacturer that has already, treated them in such a way that they have no volatile organic emissions. Having trouble speaking this morning, talking too fast. So that is absolutely something that is critical, is to work with people who can provide that assurance. And some of our clients are willing to take a little bit of risk on this for something where they say, well, if it doesn't work out, we will be able to replace it with another version of the reclaimed thing. But that's up to clients, and their appetite varies according to the size of the project and their global goals. And some clients do have very high expectations for reuse, again, because it meets their purpose of their mission to actually help to support a circular economy.
Right. Susie, Franco, do you want to talk about, any concerns that you hear from clients on your end about regenerated material versus virgin material? And then Susie, I'd like if you want to come in as well.
Well, the way we design our products, or the way we make our product, is really make it indistinguishable from the fossil-based material we are talking about. So nylon and ECONYL are exactly the same thing from a molecular and chemical standpoint. Because the way we go back to the raw material. So no, I would say that the concern about performances is not being on our radar. I mean, as far as what we make as ECONYL, of course, there's a lot of recycled material of sort which are kind of downgraded into something else as a economic version of another product, because they are recycled, so they're not pure, they don't perform, you need to expect some level of minor performances. In our case, we believe in going back to the raw material as much as possible, so you can make something which has the same economic value of the original material. So that's what I would say. I if you allow me, I may want to add another couple of small tips or more small thoughts for the audience to say, of course, moving the world from linear to circular is going to be an epic task, and so it's going to take years, decades, and billions of dollars. But if we want to just be practical on what we can do right now, I may say a couple of things. One is look at the weight of what you buy. So weight is a critical thing. There is definitely an excess of weight, which is put in everything we buy, we manufacture, or we like to be in possession of. And think about cars. I'm coming from Europe, so the difference in the weight of the cars between a European buyer versus an American buyer is so gigantic. We probably here in this country, we carry around 3 times as much weight per person just because we like to buy gigantic cars. But going into carpet, 50% of the weight of carpet, at least broadloom carpet, but also tiles and other commercial carpet, is made out of a filler. Filler has no real purpose if not to be a filler. So when you buy something, try to buy something lightweight as much as possible, because if we all buy or use 20 or 25% less weight, there's going to be 25% less material which is being taken from earth. That is just going wasted because we like to have a very heavy carpet on our floor, which no improvement on the performances. The other topic, I think, when you talk about demolition and using the material which are coming from demolition, I think what we need to be focused on in separation. keep things apart. Don't put it all together in one pile, which is easy, which is simple, which is like the trash can concept, throw everything in it and somebody will carry it over. But once everything is put it together in one big pile, nothing has more value. It becomes a liability. There's no more residual value that you can get out of it. And so, for instance, specifically talking about carpet, frequently the constructor or the deconstructor leave the carpet down as last, so because they use it like a sort of receptacle of all the leftovers. So, you take it all, destroy the drywall, take the fixtures off, and then, the carpet is last, so you can sort of collect all the trash out. Wonderful. But then, who need to recycle carpet get a product which is not usable anymore because it's so much heavily contaminated by other materials that is make the work of recycling even harder. But apart carpet and aside carpet, just in general, keep things apart, keep things separated, find streams, because if you have something that is sort of identified and identifiable, you can work with it. Just if you go to a landfill and just, you try to dig out stuff, it's an immense task, which is not, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Susie, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, so it's sort of touching on the question of like, how do I ensure warranty? And this is definitely not the answer for that, but it is just another mindset sort of shift to take. And I think that that's when we talk about a circular economy, it's the opportunity for craftsmen to be in play, right? So, I mean, Gail was saying like these material appraisers are an opportunity, but that's where, and Franco, I do respect that, yes, moving to a fully circular economy will cost us some money, but you think about the investment we're making in clean green jobs, creative jobs, that isn't what we're calling, paying to just haul materials to a landfill that have no value once they're finished. So I think that's a really cool way to think about, and just a different way of saying like, well, maybe this is not coming with this traditional, like, 2, 5, 10-year warranty, but it might give me an opportunity to really work with an industry or a trade that is a community, right? It's growing your community. And that's really where circular happens, I think, best is on those local levels and knowing who's who. So I think the other bit that, and this just kind of goes to this, that Jennifer asked about companies for decorative reclaimed wood. I'm not an architect. I don't specify these beautiful things, but I do have a brother that lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. And one time I was just driving along in this, sort of industrial part of town, and there was this beautiful store called Smoky Mountain Vintage Lumber. And I just sat back and I'm like, this is fabulous that somebody has taken materials and now given them not just another life, but actual value. He's feeding his family. He's employing people in this community, and all of this stuff is staying out of our landfills. So it is, I think we have to be patient with some of these changes because they're not always this big systems approach, but they can be these smaller systems locally. And so that's what I would just say, get excited about and talk to people in your community. You'll find the resources. Yeah.
I think that's really important, that rediscovering the local nature of construction and building, I think, is so important. It ticks so many boxes. Obviously there's a carbon impact of that, which is positive. I think there's a community impact of that, which is positive, especially if we're thinking about the social impact of our work and the equity impact of our work. That's really important. And so, to Jennifer, by the way, in the Q&A asked if there are any sources for decorative reclaimed wood. You just heard one in Tennessee. In Brooklyn, there's a startup called Trilux that's been looking at providing reclaimed wood to projects but also looking at sustainable forestry and really looking into the broader, deeper supply chain of wood, and using reclaimed wood as part of that. So I think there's also these companies that are doing reclaimed wood are thinking about it in really creative and influential ways. And so, that's the thing, is finding those local partners is so important. We're almost at our stop here, but Gail, I'd love to quickly get your thoughts on one last question here, and that'll be our closing comment for today's discussion. Brian asked almost a half hour ago, sorry, Brian, if there are any thoughts on resources to instruct students to design for deconstruction, whether than architecture, interior design. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how do we inculcate this practice in the coming generation of architects and interior designers.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Avi and Brian. And absolutely, I mean, my experience has been that the coming generation has the mindset already, and in some ways is leading, pushing, pulling the rest of us in the right direction. I am not, I don't do any regular teaching. I do a periodic, speaking as a guest speaker in classrooms. And this topic has come up as part of the overall either, designing for resilience, designing for sustainability. But I think it is such an opportunity, just to plant this thought in your head, Brian, of actually having students do a project to find those local sources and then go for it, help to build something for a community center or, for Habitat, or I'm just going to throw that out there just because those things are so rewarding. And it also then gets students into, the mindset of, oh, where do I find these things locally? Because that was also a great question. Where do you source them? And often it will be through a number of people, including contractors locally, local building departments, local even Goodwill or Habitat for Humanity restores will often have sources for the reclaimed materials or places that they can recommend you talk to. So that's kind of sidestepping your question, Brian, but so glad you asked it. And again, I think this coming generation is actually very much of this mindset already.
Thank you so much, Gail. And thanks everyone for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much to Aquafil for making today's discussion possible. And of course to Gail and Susie and Franco for all your comments today. We addressed this topic, I think, at a high level, but also with some great level of detail. I think we do have to attack it from all these fronts, and designing for deconstruction is going to be absolutely critical, whether we're thinking about resilience, whether we're thinking about climate change, whether we're thinking about equity. It can be such an important tool in our arsenal, and it can really shift our industry onto a more responsible, not just environmental path, but economic path as well. Thank you all so much for this discussion. It's been an absolute pleasure.